everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we'll be ranking the top 20 background bonuses on non-unique characters in Total War 3 Kingdoms. Previously, in our tier list series, we focused only on ranking unique characters in the game, or characters with unique artworks. But in reality, there are plenty of unique characters in the game with generic artwork, as they included a ton of historically relevant characters with unique background titles, and thus unique background bonuses. So today we'll shift our focus to these characters as we'll rank the top 20 background bonuses on them. Now before we start, I do have to explain my methodology a little bit, as you might have different opinions than me on these rankings, which is fine. Overall for this ranking, I am going to ignore characters' age for the most part, as they're often from different starting dates. I'll make note if the character is really old, for example, as that might mean they will die fairly quickly, but of course you can be playing on timeless mode and it would not matter at all. I will also exclude all 8 Princes characters, all Naman characters, and all Yellow Turban characters, because they really don't compare well with most of the characters in the game. So we're going to keep it pretty exclusive to Han characters. Now there will be a few bandit characters that will slip into the ranking, because for the most part, bandit characters act pretty much like Han characters, unless you're dealing with vassalization and annexing. And for all the rankings here, I am pretty much going to value faction-wide bonuses the most, then dipping down to own army bonuses before finally coming to own retinue bonuses, with a few exceptions. When certain bonuses are just very strong, then I would have them ranked over faction-wide effects. And I'm also not going to worry about what class of characters they are, because all the generic skills could apply depending on if you put them as a faction-wide character or army character. We're not going to go that much in detail. There's also a few characters with burn traits or very useful traits in general. Those we will also kind of ignore, because you could also develop traits now in the game, and also you can obviously reroll traits with the latest update. So with all that said, let's jump into it and start our ranking from the 20th slot, where we will find Guanxin, who has the background title of the Cautious Strategist. So Guanxin is a character that you're going to find in the game starting out in Gongsun Zan's faction. He is historically Gongsun Zan's advisor, and his bonuses gives him 15% ammunition on own retinue, also 15 points of military supplies faction-wide. Now these two bonuses are not mutually exclusive, as you can have him in a faction-wide role, whether that's Prime Minister, Heir, or Leader, and also retain the 15% ammo for your own retinue. Now this bonus is not super great, but that's why he's 20th. But the ammunition boost here is same as the positive boost from the Burrent trait, so that's actually quite nice, and he's capable of picking up that trait as well. So essentially you could end up with about 30% extra ammo boost for your own retinue. And the military supplies here is also underrated. 15 is quite a lot. Now usually you don't really need military supplies unless you are planning for long sieges or long marches. But in another sense, if you happen to be playing a bandit faction, this will turn to loot, and you could play a strategy that involves using Share the Spoils in all your commanderies, and this would be a great way to keep that passive loot growth at close to 45, which means you can just leave them on the commanderies forever and boost your loot so that you can have infinite Share the Spoils, which is worth about 200% to bandit food as well as bandit income. So moving on to number 19, we have Luigi, Lu Bu's daughter. Now in the game, she has the title of Daughter of the Dragon. Now this is not a super strong boost for the faction. As a matter of fact, there is actually no faction-wide boost as part of this bonus. But you see that you get -2 morale for defending enemy forces. This is a mini scare automatically when you're on offense. Considering that scare is worth about 4 points, and you also can have terror on top of that, and she can pick up both of those, you can stack about 10 points of morale damage right off the bat to enemies, which is pretty strong. Include some night battles, and you can win a lot of battles pretty easily this way. On top of that, her calling card is that she will grant her own army 15% replenishment with this background bonus, and this is why she's on the list, because this is a lot of replenishment in the early game or in the late game, and it's worth about a garlic worth. So you can still put garlic on her and you can have close to 30% replenishment off the bat. If you include other bonuses like 5% from the skill for your commanding general, as well as population and any sort of faction-wide bonuses, you could have a very strong army that's very easy to use because you can delegate away with them and still get a lot of healing. Then moving on to the 18th plot, we have Yuffan, who is historically a advisor slash general for the Kingdom of Wu. He will show up in recruitment pools randomly throughout the mid game, and you can recruit him. His background title is the Abrasive Advisor, and this gives him a lot of different bonuses for faction wide as well as own army. So first off, there's a penalty. Minus 5 point of satisfaction for all characters faction wide. This can be dealt with in the late game, assuming he's not going to become your heir. Because by the time you are hitting Duke, where you get Prime Minister, or even King, where you're getting that full court, you will have a lot of character providing satisfaction boost through their passive authority stat. And by that time, this sort of penalty on satisfaction really doesn't hurt you that much. His own army will get 15% character experience. This is a good way to level up those generals. And you get minus 10% building upkeep cost faction wide. This one's not that significant. What's really nice here is the 5% income from all sources. That's always a nice boost, especially in the late game when you have a lot of commanderies for tax income. And the building upkeep will also help a little because now there's a lot of gate passes in the game, which cost quite a bit of upkeep per turn. So any sort of decrease there can definitely add up, but it's not as significant as the 5% income from all sources. Overall, he made the list because you just have so many different boosts here that it's kind of hard to keep him out. Then moving on to number 17, we have our Celestial Master, Zhang Lu, who has 100% food production faction-wide. This is pretty simple and straightforward. This is great if you want to use rice as diplomacy, sort of trade rice to everyone to get money or to get favors, or to force things like demand tribute, which you can use rice or food to trade for. This is pretty self-explanatory as it pretty much just doubles your food. You can see close to about 200 plus food using this as one of your prime minister characters. Then going on to the 16th spot, we have Zamba. So Zamba is the crafty operator. He is a bandit character that usually start out around Tao Qian's faction. You could see him in recruitment pool. Sometimes he starts out with his own faction depending on the chapter pack you play. And he's particularly great for two factions in the game. And the two factions are Yuanhuan and Sun Jian, because both factions could use captain retinues. And for other factions, he's not so good. 15% post-battle loot. So basically, he's one of those characters that would be God tier for certain factions and pretty average for others. So average that out, we have him as 16th. 25% recruitment and upkeep costs for captain retinues. That's why he's God tier for Yuanhuan and Sun Jian, because he can help them achieve essentially almost free captain retinues, so you can spam armies of them. And then for all the other factions, the only bonus you will get from him is the 15% post-battle loot when commanding. That's not so significant, so he will fall off quite a bit if you're not playing those two particular factions. But because the 25% is so unique and actually so great for those two factions, he's going to land on our list at 16. Then moving on to the 15th slot, we have Zhang Feng, who is the son of Zhang Yan, and that's why he's the Prince of the Black Mountains. 25% post-battle loot, faction-wide, 5% chance of ambushing for own army, and gives the whole faction ignore forest penalties. These are essentially the same exact bonus as his father, so he's a stackable clone of his father. The 25% post-battle loot is actually pretty significant in terms of income boost for any faction, so that's why he's so high on the list at 15. The chance of ambushing, obviously great for Zhang Yan's faction, given that you have the opportunity to ambush battle on offense. But overall, he's on the list because he's very good for Zhang Yan's faction, and he's decent for all the other factions because post-battle loot will add up throughout a campaign, because you'll be fighting quite a bit. Then moving on to the 14th spot, we have Rufan, who is the Go Master. Now, this doesn't really fit him historically. He starts out as a free agent for most factions. I think he has fondness to Yuan Shu and Sun Ce's faction, or Sun Jian's faction. And you can pick him up usually in the first few turns when he spawns, if he shows up in your recruitment pool. And this bonus is pretty straightforward, 100% income boost for silk and spice income. So obviously, if you are starting out in the west, whether northwest or southwest, you can pick up those 3 silk or 3 spice, and they function like utility buildings in Monopoly, where the more of the same type of counties you have, they will stack up in a faction-wide bonus, and this will just give you additional 100% income. This is worth about, I believe, 1,500 per turn if you own both. It's pretty good, especially in the mid game. In the late game, it does fall off a little bit, but overall, it's a nice bonus to have. Then moving on in the 13th slot, we have Yuanhuan, who is the agricultural reformer. Now, he's on the list because he's an insanely good administrator, but he's very hard to get because he starts out turn 1 in the 190 start as the first army that Cao Cao has to fight. So the only way you can pick him up is that if you play Cao Cao, and that you capture him in that turn 1 battle instead of killing him, or else he ends up dead in all campaigns. And his bonuses here is that if you make him the administrator, he will give all green buildings 1 less turn of construction time and minus 30% additional cost on top of whatever his expertise is, which is not that high because he's a commander. And on top of that, if you don't use him as administrator, you can use him for his unique assignment, which is agriculture development. This is the same assignment that you get when using a farmer background from the generic champion class. So it's quite nice. It's minus 2 turns of green building construction time and 50% additional food. He's essentially focused on developing commanderies that are focused either on food production or peasantry income. Very useful for those commanderies with a lot of green counties like lumberyards, livestock farms, and farmlands. Then moving on to the 12th slot, we have Yang Hong, who's the respected advisor. He starts out in Yuan Shu's faction, and he provides some interesting faction-wide bonuses of minus 5% recruitment costs, which adds up pretty nicely. Now, I do prefer upkeep discount over recruitment discount, but sometimes you can't really pick and choose. And also, you give +1 starting rank for all recruits. So these are just nice bonuses to have in the early game, especially before you build out all your armies. It does fall off in the late game once you have all your armies on the field, and you can definitely switch them out then. Then in the 11th slot, we have Jungven, who starts out in the 182 campaign. So his age is a little bit old, and he's the Peerless Protege. And he gets minus 15% upkeep for all range units, faction-wide. So as we just mentioned, I prefer upkeep discount over recruitment discount because these are every single turn. And if you're focused in a range faction, specializing in range unit, whether that's Liu Chong with his Chen Royal Guards, or you're playing Kong Rong with his Furia Beihai, this type of bonus will really push your faction ahead because most of your units are going to be blue units, thus range units. Then in the 10th lot, we have Zhongyuan, another 182 character who starts out in Lu Zhi's faction, and he has the auxiliary leader, which gives you 15% upkeep for cavalry units. And this is conversely true for all factions with unique cavalry units, or even if you don't, for both of these bonus, they're quite relevant because most factions will have a sizable amount of range unit and also a sizable amount of cavalry unit, and both of them can get very pricey if you're talking about siege weapons or heavy cavalry units in the late game that do cost quite a bit of upkeep per turn, and 15% is definitely a significant boost. If you're playing a faction like Ma Teng, where you're trying to reduce the cost of all your town unit, you have faction-wide characters that provide those discounts for upkeep. Add in Zhongyuan, and you end up closer to that 100% dream where you have free upkeep for all your town unit, which is still possible. It's just very difficult to achieve. Then heading into the top 9 here, starting out in number 9, we have Rojun. Now obviously Rojun is one of those characters with the burn trait. We won't give him credit for that. Essentially his background is an income boost, guardian of the people, 10% income from all sources faction-wide. This is not as good as you think, as you will see some of the top 8 characters will have one bonus that you didn't think was quite good. But essentially, this is a nice income boost in the late game when you have a lot of counties up and you get a lot of income from them. A nice 10% boost will, give you a lot of income in the late game to help push you through for the final push. Then in the 8th slot, we have leopien. Now, this is the Emperor's older brother. If you start in the 182 campaign, he is the Vanguard kid who's slightly older, and his background title is Lord Shi. And he has +6 points of public order faction wide. Now, usually you look at public order and you kind of ignore it because the punishment for having bad public order is not that hard. You have to deal with some rebels, which could drop you good weapons, give you experience, give you money. That is true. But if you think about how you want to rank these, a lot of characters give things like +2 public order, or maybe +4. It's very rare you have someone +6. As a matter of fact, I think leopien provides the most public order faction wide through his background bonus. And when you have someone like this, you have to think about the +6 in a different light. +6 public order is essentially one tax level increase because the first tax level boost costs you 6 public order in every single one of your commanders. And he will neutralize that. And because this is equivalent to one tax increase, this is essentially equivalent to what you get from one tax increase. And that is 10% income boost to all income, as well as 25% food increase. So 6 points is equivalent to 10% that rojun has, and additionally you get food. So that's why he's going to be ranked slightly above rojun here. Then continue on, we have jorun, who starts out in the east, central part, closer to the south as his own faction. He's the populist rogue, and you get 100% income from looting settlements. This is very similar to post-battle loot income. It will add up during the campaign. It's pretty nice to have. And on top of that, he will also give you +5 points of public order. And we just explained what +6 point is equal to, so +5 is close to that. And on top of that, you get the 100% income from looting settlements. So looting settlement means any sort of post-siege battle income that you get. You get a certain amount of cash after every land fight, and you get a certain amount of cash after any settlement fight. Even if you don't actually loot it, as in loot and occupy, you'll still get a base income from that fight. And this will double whatever that income is. And should you decide to loot it, it'll double whatever amount of loot it should have had. Then moving on to the 6th spot, we have Du Ji, who is the model governor. We get faction-wide 4 points of public order and then another 5% income from all sources. So this is sort of a combo for our 8th and 9th place rank. Instead of getting 10% or 6 points, we get 4 points and 5%. So 4 point being slightly higher than, halfway of 6, he's going to win out a little bit more. So essentially you can almost get a full tax increase and you still get another 5% on top of that, making him quite a nice character to use. I believe he also starts with the burn trait, but he's a Vanguard character. Now, Vanguards aren't bad faction-wide characters. They actually have quite a bit of faction-wide boost on their skill tree. Then hitting into our top 5, we start out with Guatu, the erratic advisor. Now, historically, he is a visor for Yuanshao's faction, but in-game, I believe you just have to pick him up a bit randomly through the recruitment pool. Now, his bonuses are quite nice for the campaign, 10% campaign movement range, and minus 15% chance of avoiding ambushes. That's a punishment. That means it's easier for you to fall into ambushes, but the way to really avoid being ambushed in the game is just pay attention to enemy movements on the map. So I don't think that's really relevant. The AI is not that smart about ambushing, so in the course of a long campaign, you might get ambushed like once or twice. Unless you're playing against Zhang Yan's faction, then you should just take a different strategy. End your turn either in encampment, or either you are in ambush, or just stay inside a city. But the 10% campaign movement range is actually super good. I value it insanely high. It's one of the few things that I value more than economic boost, which tends to be my focus. Because extra movement gives you a lot of flexibility in catching enemy armies out of position, catching them when they're on march, which gives you a huge advantage in battle, or just completing the campaign a bit faster instead of wasting so many turns and thus upkeep on your armies that can't really move as far. So that definitely really helps. Then in the 4th slot, we have Guo Si, who's the paranoid thug. He gives 10% construction cost discount faction-wide. The earlier you can get this, the better. So you might even consider making him your prime minister when you hit Duke, and 10 points of military supplies in own territory, which we mentioned earlier when we talked about Guanxin. This really depends. In own territory is probably really weak because usually when you need military supplies is when you're out on the field on enemy territory trying to siege them down, or you're trying to march through the territories. So that part is less good, but if you happen to be playing a bandit faction, then this is exactly what you want, because you want to have loot increased when you're doing share the spoils on your own territory. So in that sense, that makes him really great. But the main thing that he's useful for is the 10% construction cost discount, which adds up tremendously through the course of a campaign, because buildings are super expensive in the game, and the payoff you get on them with the per turn increase in income that you get, like the marginal income increase that you get from each upgrade, takes so long for you to pay you back, about 20 plus turns, that any sort of construction cost discount or turn discount you can get on the buildings will make them worth so much more to you. That's why administrators are super important with high expertise, and that's why the 10% construction cost here is super underrated, because the money you save early on and the faster you can push those buildings up, the better off you will be in the late game when you can put out those 20 armies to help you win the game. Then in the top 3, we start with Ren Yi, the Royal Yuan. He started out with his own faction in Chang'an in the 182 start. He is going to be a little bit old in the game, but not super old. So if you play the 182 campaign, you can definitely try to pick him up. He doesn't really spawn in later campaigns though, so you're not really going to see him in game. Now he will give you 10% corruption reduction faction-wide. This is super valuable. This is why characters like Guatu are constantly ranked very high on our unique character tier list, or people like Cao Pi, very good marriage targets, and Yuan Yi here also have that. Then moving on to the second slot, we have Yang Feng, who is the White Wave Warlord. And he gives 10% character experience faction-wide, and most valuably, 10% revenue upkeep for every single character in the game faction-wide. And that's really where he shines. 10% revenue upkeep is central for a lot of strategies that try to push for free upkeep. It's worth a ton. You can have this on, cavalry, you can have this on range, you can have this on every single type of unit for all your armies. And when you get to the late game, when you have 20 plus armies, this will be a sizable amount of money that you will save. And also 10% character experience is pretty nice to get. So highly recommend grabbing him and using him in one of your prime minister slots in the late or mid game, whenever you can get him in there. Then in our number 1 slot, we have Qiao Xuan, the Harbinger of Chaos. So Qiao Xuan only exists in the 182 campaign. He starts out in Emperor Liu Hong's faction, and he is 76, I believe, or 72 when you start the game. So his chance of death is super high unless you play on timeless mode. But if you happen to be playing on timeless mode, he is absolutely the best character you can get, because he will instantly give you minus 100% corruption faction-wide. And that means no matter what your base corruption is, doesn't matter how big your empire is, you will not have to pay any percentage to corruption loss. And that is insanely good in the game, because corruption is the number 1 anti-snowball mechanic in the game. Most new players don't watch out for corruption, and by mid-game, you realize the more you expand, the less money you're making, and your campaign can spiral out of control and you can lose the game. So essentially, you have to spend a lot of energy in terms of reforms, in terms of what building options you have to pick to reduce corruption throughout your game. But with Qiao Xuan here, you never have to worry about corruption ever again. The sad thing is he's very old and he's only a strategist, which is not so great for faction-wide bonuses, but really you cannot compete with 100% corruption. So he's really the winner here for our ranking list here, and that's going to end it for our top 20 characters who are not unique artwork characters with unique backgrounds. And tell me if you agree with any of these. And we're going to wrap up our character ranking or tier list series for now. We'll come back in the future and rank all the non-main characters once I do get all their background progression where they do the level ups. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye!